Welcome to Real Estate Radio Live, an informative and engaging podcast discussing everything you need to know about the world of real estate. Your host, Joe Cucchiara, provides you with insight and guidance on how to buy, sell, finance, and invest in real estate. He also offers real estate tax management strategies, new construction advice, home improvement tips, and much, much more. And now, to guide you around the world of real estate, here's your host and Real Estate Radio Live team leader, Joe Cucchiara.
Welcome in, Joe Cucchiara with Real Estate Radio Live. I hope everyone is doing well as we kick off into already February of 2021. Been quite a 2020, and I remind everyone I did a podcast last week. I'm going to try to do them at least once or twice a week. There's a lot of stuff going on. I want to try to bring this information to you as much as we can. But we have a lot of great topics here in the next couple of months, and I'm excited about today's topic. Most of you are familiar with Jack Russo, good time friend, longtime friend and business associate as well. But, you know, one of the benefits of having Jack on today is he is going to have firsthand knowledge of what it's like to have relocated to Florida, not permanently, but because of some personal reasons, most of you know, and then
it feels permanent.
Yeah,
it feels permanent at this point. I mean, you know, I like to imagine that California will call me back, but I have to tell you, everything's being done by Zoom in the courts, and that may continue for a while, depending on this variation in the COVID virus. We'll see.
But you have a great perspective, Jack, because, you know, and let me just set the stage and then we'll start the dialogue. So the stage is that most may know this, but, you know, Jack's been in Silicon Valley for 40 plus years, studied law, ran a successful business, still does. Also a real estate investor, worked with, venture capital, seed money, all this. So the perspective is you have this wide range of knowledge and expertise around the Silicon Valley, what runs that engine. And now you've also seen what's take place in the last 12 to 18 months. You're in Florida now, and you're seeing what's happening there from a personal and business perspective. So maybe set the stage for us and tell us what your experience has been, both personally and professionally, the last 8 to 12 months.
Right. So I moved here because my brother died last year and my mother lost her support system, which was sort of built to some degree around him. I like to say she more supported him, but that's a long story that you can have a long historical debate about. And she didn't want to go into a nursing home. And at the time, the nursing homes weren't really accepting people because they weren't interviewing, because the COVID crisis more or less prevented anyone from visiting.
Right.
So one thing led to another. And of course, everything was being done by Zoom. We weren't really meeting people in an office. We were sort of operating the practice as we have, and even the investment side as we have by Zoom. So I just started making lemonade out of lemons. I was going to say making lemons out of lemonade, but I think the term is lemonade, lemonade out of lemons. And I mean, the very first thing I did was start to look at, well, what's the price of real estate here? Because everyone you talk to here talks about how there's great bargains, and there are, without question, there are great bargains. You know, for the record, I'm in the Tampa area. I think Miami is a quite different market. I think that there are other markets that are big legal centers in Florida that are different markets, but Tampa in particular has grown immensely. It's about 2 hours hour and 3/4 from Orlando. You can fly into Orlando. That code is MCO. You can fly into Tampa. That code is TPA. The price to fly from SFO to Orlando on United is like $94 one way. Wow. Pretty cheap. The price to Tampa might be a little higher because there aren't as many flights. I think Disney might subsidize those flights because they want people to come to Disneyland, which is or Disney World, whichever one it is. I think it's Disney World in Orlando. And there's a lot of real estate development between Orlando and Tampa. And so the very first thing I started watching, I went to kind of a few auctions, frankly. I just went to a few auctions to see what happened. And I was amazed that these office buildings were about 1 1/10 or 1/20th of the price of what you would pay for an office building in downtown Palo Alto or downtown San Francisco. And I was like, how do they build these properties for as low as they go off on auction, or go off sometimes even, for retail sale when they're being built new? Of course, a lot of office buildings were just going on auction because no one was paying rent, and a lot of the offices were clearing out. So it was a good time to look, and I actually bought an office building here with a view of planting East Coast version of an affiliated office of Computer Law Group, which I've started to interview people around. It's kind of a long process because you have to interview them over Zoom. So you don't really get to really do a real interview in the traditional style. But I've interviewed a few people. The price of talent is about a third to 66 to 75% less than the price of talent in the Bay Area market. The price of housing is probably 1/10. I mean, that's maybe an extreme version, because if you're going to higher end housing, it maybe is half or a third, but you get a lot for your money. I mean, a lot more real estate, a lot more house, a lot more square footage, a lot more amenities. I mean, just a lot more. I mean, I think Palo Alto is you see cottages or hear about cottages that are 1,000 square feet going for over 2 million. That's 2,000 a square foot for a rundown cottage. That's brand new here, might be $100 a square foot.
Right. Wow.
I mean, you buy a 4,000 square foot house for maybe $400,000, brand new. I mean, and so when you look at the benefits of the climate as you get older, you don't really want to be in the cold unless you're a skier. There are some people, but they're the exception. You don't want to pay state income taxes, particularly on your Social Security check. I mean, that's weird that they tax a check. I mean, my mom today gave me what will probably be her last tax return data, and she has her Social Security stub, and I'm like, you pay taxes on this? She says, yeah, of course you got to pay. I didn't even realize that Social Security is taxed. So that means in California, it's taxed as well.
Yeah.
So think about that. If you get to the age of getting Social Security, you're going to get a check, and it's going to have a burden on it, both a federal and a state burden. So if you can eliminate the state burden, that's pretty good. The price of fuel or gas is about half the price. The price of talent is, as I said, you can have live-in help for a much smaller price if you're just looking at getting older.
Right.
So there are a lot of reasons, and a lot of it is price for value. A lot of it is, for some people, not me, but for some people, it's more conservative here. It's more religious. It's more Trump. I mean, Trump lives in Mar-a-Lago, which is down south, and this is sort of his state. I think he'll probably run for governor at some point or do something to get back into politics. I don't know if it'll be directly to the presidency. I mean, he barely avoided being convicted in the impeachment trial, which was kind of a joke in the sense that anything and everything that could be called evidence was shown, and still, I mean, I said, if you applied the federal rules of evidence to both sides on most of what was shown, that trial would be like 1/10 the amount of time, because the judge would have eliminated. So now I understand why Justice Roberts didn't want to preside over that circus, because it would have tarnished his name. He would have said, you guys are not following any of the evidentiary rules. This is all hearsay. This is all argument.
So true.
Yeah. But it was entertaining. I mean, I have to say, I did watch some of it, and I did listen to a lot of it in the car as I was driving. And people do still meet with masks here in Florida. They are far, far ahead of California on vaccine distribution, way ahead. I think practically anyone that's over 65 can get vaccinated, like just by asking for it. So I think California is behind on that. You don't see as much what I'll call street poverty here. I mean, there clearly are people that are living in mobile homes and what might be called trailer parks, but they're not on the street. So for better or worse, you could argue they've solved the housing problem with the idea that you live in a trailer park. And, there are trailer parks in Silicon Valley. And there are, of course, these rolling trailer parks that are parked along the side of El Camino.
Well, that actually, That's actually a good point, Jack, because what you're saying is, you know, in a level, there's still places in Florida where land and even mobile homes or manufactured homes are cheap enough where even someone that's living above or at the poverty level, that keeps them off the streets, right? Where that wouldn't happen in a place like Silicon Valley.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Because they could rent, they could even rent if they can't buy. They
Right.
could even rent something for a few $100
Right.
that comes out of their sort of check, whatever
Right.
check they're getting. And so they're living sheltered, they're not getting rained on, they're not getting, they're not living in the element. And they probably in general get better health care here. I'm going to say that with a footnote because I think if you want to get a serious operation, going to Stanford or UCSF or one of the great hospitals in California can't be beat, although obviously Florida's got big cancer centers like Moffitt and others. But generally speaking, I think the poverty class, or what might be called the lower working class, because a lot of people in those, what I'll call depressed areas, and there are a few of them, they generally will work for cash. Like there are a lot of gardeners, there are a lot of helpers. That these are not lazy people. They're not like expecting to get paid. So they do a lot of stuff that might be called small cottage businesses.
Mhm.
And they're doing it kind of right out of their house. Like today, just because it happened today, it's such a funny story. This is like a, several $1,000 grill because my wife bought a grill from Home Depot that needed to be assembled. It was like 5 hours of my time.
Don't ever do that.
I did it. I said, at least buy the power screwdriver that allows you to. So we were doing it with the wrong tools. I could tell you how many hours. But it had a brand new, just a spanking brand new can of gas. And, when you bring the gas in and you trade it, you get kind of an old can.
Yeah.
So I actually found the place that gives you gas into your can.
Yeah.
Like this is the propane dispensary.
Right.
It was run out of a woman's house. Like literally, she had the tank in the front yard of her house with the sign, least expensive propane in all of Florida. And I think she does have the least expensive propane in all of Florida.
That's great. So you got
she runs out of her house.
You also have, which is interesting, we're hearing about businesses, not only, so you have the personal, people fleeing to Florida. And I know there's other states like Texas and others, but I think Florida really is getting the most publicity right now, not only because the cost of living, the ease of living, but, the fact that they've really seemed to, as best they can, handle the coronavirus and still maintain somewhat of a business and lifestyle. So we're also hearing businesses moving. Is that still looking like businesses from New York, for instance, and upstate into Florida as well?
Yeah, I think there's three targets for where California entrepreneurs will gravitate. One is obviously right over the border to Nevada, because they'll say, and I've had a few already who've said, hey, I could jump on a Southwest flight and be in either Los Angeles or in San Francisco in maybe less time than it would take for me to commute from San Jose to San Francisco, and certainly to Los Angeles, even counting the flight. So that's one area. The second, of course, is Austin, Texas, where, depending on how you feel about the weather, there are ice storms that are happening right now. Although I think Austin was safe from them, but Dallas, it's like 120 car pileup or something like that. Killed a lot of people. I mean, ice storms in February. I mean, it happens. I mean, it could be 70 degrees in Dallas tomorrow. The weather's quite freaky there, but it's the hub for American Airlines. So you could definitely get to either the East Coast or the West Coast pretty quickly. And then the natural non-tax state from there is Florida. Now, you could say Washington, but the state of Washington has sort of a wacky revenue tax that businesses have to pay. So some people think it's sort of a substitute for the state income tax. But basically, the three target cities are sort of Reno, Austin, and somewhere in Florida. I was going to say Miami, but the cost of real estate in Miami is way higher than the cost
Yeah.
of either Tampa or Orlando, for sure.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. So you have businesses considering, you even go as far as, I thought it was an interesting story. I don't know if you saw that the by design, the NRA files bankruptcy and then moves from New York to Texas, which it's amazing. They've been in New York, I heard, for I don't know how many hundreds of years or some crazy
Right.
thing.
They've antagonized a lot of the New York regulators in a variety of ways. So it didn't surprise me. I'm kind of surprised they didn't come to Florida, because there's a very active, legit uh, uh, marksman rifle community here. I mean, really legit, like tournaments, and not crazies that are storming the Capitol, but like people that really take seriously hunting
Mhm.
and fishing. Obviously, the outdoor sports are really big here. If you're an outdoors person, I don't think you can beat the fishing that actually exists here in Florida, whether it's lake fishing or it's ocean fishing.
Yeah.
But in general, the point I wanted to make about what's happening, that's the biggest observation, is there is a venture capital community here, but it is not what I would say the early stage venture capital community. It tends to be more of, oh, you've got Bundle Select and you're making 20 million in revenue and you're like barely profitable, but if you inject another 5 million, you're going to see the revenues double and then you're going to be profitable. Then they'll jump in. That's like more, in Silicon Valley terms, that's more like growth funding than real venture capital. So they are sorely in need of what I would call the early stage venture capital that has existed for a long time in Silicon Valley, and does exist because there's so many angel investors that become very wealthy through startups that they get affiliated with, whether it's Apple or it's some other company. And then their natural progression is to help other entrepreneurs.
Yeah. Before we move on to, I have some things I want to talk about. I have some vision on second homes, and part of this title I listed for our podcast was not only people fleeing to Florida, but I see some things potentially coming for second homes. So I'll talk about that with you in a couple of minutes. But to kind of wrap this up, what would you say? I mean, you discussed the obvious positive reasons why someone would want to flee to Florida. As you spend enough time there, Jack, what are some of the things that you might miss, or you might say, gee, now that I've spent some time here, I could see why I would miss the Silicon Valley or another aspect, both personally and professionally?
Well, being in downtown Palo Alto and a bike ride away from Stanford, that hub is irreplaceable. And there is no similar campus with the kind of beautiful landscaping, not really landscaping, farm. It's true. For those who haven't visited Stanford, it's a mega sized campus, and you could ride a bike there for hours and not repeat the same territory. And it's a great university, and it's got great professors, and it's got great students, and you can't replace that. So the quality, I'm going to say this with a footnote, because there's clearly people here that are equally as smart. The quality of the intellect of the people that in and around Silicon Valley, Stanford, this whole area has traditionally been higher IQ, higher EQ, a higher sense of purpose. Like, you could argue Jobs and Wozniak, when they formed Apple, said, hey, to their lawyers, including my old firm, we're going to democratize computing. And that was a big statement, because there were just mainframe computers back then. And you don't really hear that. You don't really hear that kind of thinking here. It's not at the same level. I think there still are a lot of people in California that are visionaries. I think what Tesla has done, you want to say it's Musk, but it's more other people that started that business, and then he joined and certainly accelerated it. It's really caused a disruptive change in the automobile industry. I mean, Ford Motor Company is not going to build cars anymore other than the Mustang, and that's going to be an electric version.
Yeah, there's no doubt.
It's a big change. I mean, I think Apple's probably going to buy Ford at some level and turn it totally into an electric vehicle company. But
I would agree. You know, I think that as we transition to the second home conversation, it is interesting. We talked a little before we came on the podcast that I'm getting this feeling, you know, being in the Silicon Valley for so long, I know you were too. We lived through the dot-com, we lived through the mortgage meltdown, we moved. And this is starting to seem very similarly, eerily similar in the sense that every time you go online or you read a newspaper or you see something, you have all these stock experts. Everybody's made $1 million yesterday on a stock, and people can't do wrong with purchasing homes. And so it seemed a little, to me, I have to admit, years ago, I kind of got caught up in. Now I'm stepping back and trying to be in position, what I would call maybe for a downturn, whether it be the market or something else, and maybe take advantage like a lot of these people do. But I guess with that being said, what I see coming in the second home market, and this is, I'll just, again, make it clear, this is my opinion because I've seen several markets, and I'll address it specific to the Silicon Valley. So what I saw in the last 20, 30 years was when real estate did really well in the Silicon Valley, the next stage, what happened was you'd see the kind of the vacation homes like Santa Cruz, Tahoe, Monterey, Carmel. You'd see all them start to benefit down the road because all the money, the stock market. So we're seeing this huge surge in second home purchases, up 80% from last year, just second home purchases alone. And we know why. The reason why is the pandemic. The thought is I could work from anywhere. Why don't I buy a home near the lake or the ocean or somewhere in Napa or somewhere that I could just work? So I think that's all great right now because there's a diversification of money out of the market in the real estate. So I can see that. So I guess what I want to talk a little bit about, and I'm looking in the next couple of years, I'm wondering if at one point when maybe life and market and business comes back to somewhat normal, if now all of a sudden people regret or wonder, man, I bought that house in Tahoe, I bought that house in Carmel for $2 million, and I really don't spend much time there anymore because now I'm back to my regular routine. Now, you could always rent it in Airbnb and doing all that, but so I'm wondering, what's your take on how this whole thing might affect these secondary markets?
Well, if interest rates go up, I would think that look, I think we're headed to the next industrial revolution in a really mega cycle. We've accelerated into what arguably is to be called the sixth industrial revolution. I won't recount all five, but basically it starts with the steam engine, and you can look this up and you'll see different people say fifth versus sixth. I think we're really going to the sixth. And the sixth is everything is automated. So you don't have to make sure you hit the right keystrokes in Zoom. Zoom just knows because you dictated to something like Alexa or Siri, I'm going to do a podcast, and all the keystrokes were handled.
So you're really talking about, in essence, you're talking about artificial intelligence, machine learning.
Yeah, machine learning in what I would call a human way, like the way you would have an assistant that would be with you, and your assistant, I think you used to have your daughter doing this, would set everything up, and you'd walk into the studio and bang, you would just be the performer. And now, because you don't have that, and I don't have that, you do all the keystroking, you make sure it happens, and you don't regret it. But automation will take care of all these little nitpicky things, and we will see a result that a lot of workers who are mismatched and used to have in Silicon Valley $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year jobs just doing little tasks, not big tasks, little things that made you have a bit of convenience. They're going to fall out of the system and have to gravitate to some retraining or something else. And that sixth industrial revolution is going to hit, and it's going to hit in a way that's going to cause a lot of disruption, even greater than Andrew Yang, who talked about, well, maybe we just have to give people money because they're sitting at home. And it shocks people, but he's onto something in the sense that when it finally hits, that you don't need all that support staff around you, and you just get the stuff done that you want done, and you have talent and they don't, and you've built a repertoire of goodwill and they haven't, and you have a brand and they don't. I mean, there's so many differences there. And when all gets said and done, your wealth is increasing and their wealth is decreasing.
Yeah.
And maybe you could spend it, but you're probably going to invest it. And then the question becomes, what happens? Now, my view is there'll be some people that have to move from California because it's just too expensive.
Right.
And, they'll move to even states that are less expensive than Florida. I mean, look, Alaska pays you to live in Alaska. Alaska has a essentially negative return of tax money to the individuals who are full-time residents. Yeah. So you go to Alaska and you fill out whatever forms you fill out, and you're a full-time resident, and they have such an overflow of wealth from oil and other things that they want residents to be there. It's a little bit like some of these European countries that pay couples to have kids because they're worried about the demographics. So I think we're going to see a big mega trend. And I don't know what it does to secondary, particularly in the California market, because I could say the one secondary market I look at carefully, because I always had this dream. Now my mom and my brother may have changed it, that I would be some sort of surfer dude in Stinson Beach in my 60s. And I would own a bunch of, park places along the boardwalk kind of thing.
Yeah.
And, Stinson Beach is a little mini market of itself, and I watch it. And when you start seeing things go on the market rapidly there, that's people bailing out of second homes because they can't afford the taxes, or they can't afford the insurance, or they can't afford the carry. They're not there. If you leave the wrong time of day, it takes 2 hours to get there from even San Francisco. If you hit traffic, you have to be really careful.
Yeah, so you were wise enough to do that. How many years ago did you buy that and scoop up that property in Stinson Beach? Was that 15? 15 years ago?
Yeah, it was a lot. It was longer than that. I just started sniffing around, and there were things that came on the market in weird ways, and you have to have your ear to the ground. There are very few brokers in that market. They have to know you're serious. They don't waste time with tire kickers. They have to be on the lookout for you. There's not like a huge number of agents. There's like just a half dozen agents that know that market and really live that market. And it's all word of mouth. And a lot of the selling, by the way, happens without agents.
Yeah.
Just based on, so-and-so's putting a property for sale. Let's call up the top 4 or 5 people that buy properties for cash. And deals get done privately all the time in Stinson, all the time.
Yeah, so before we wrap things up, you also think that that's something to keep an eye on. If you start seeing kind of second home markets, more homes starting to go on the market, that's kind of a bit of a sign that people are starting to either struggle with things or figure it's time to sell, or maybe they're not quite sure if they want to continue to own that liability.
Well, the economists would probably look at notices of default that are filed with the court, and you can actually track that. Those are the preliminary notices that get issued by the lender.
Right.
Some people like to track other things. You could track, for example, car leases and car leases going on the market, because you could transfer a car lease. So if you see a blip, but now that's confused because a lot of people don't need cars anymore. Like, why pay for a lease of a car that's in your garage when you're not really using it? I mean, there are some car leases that are $2,000 a month. It's a high-end BMW. It could be $2,000 a month with the taxes and insurance.
Yeah,
you're not driving it. You're not driving it even the allocated 1,000 miles a month. You're just not on the road anymore.
Right.
So that's a little confusing, because that could be a different reason why people are exiting from their lease. But you can look at a lot of secondary data and start to see what might be called the crash of 2001 or 2000 even, or the crash of 2008. I mean, there's a relationship between the boom and the bust. There's a total relationship. And when you sense that the newspaper boy is telling you what cryptocurrency to invest in, because that's the modern view of what's going on, the shoe shine person, I'm going to call him boy, it could be a man, girl as well. When they start telling you, well, have you heard about this cryptocurrency, man, something's going on there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say in general, it feels frothy. It feels frothy in both the stock market and certain class of real estate. I think very high-end real estate right now is suffering because I don't think banks are lending above a certain number. I don't think banks feel comfortable. I think they feel the same jitters, like, oh, we're going to make a $5 million loan on this property that currently pencils for maybe 8. Well, we don't know if that 8 is real, because that 8 may not be real in the next year or so.
Yeah. All right. Well, this has been a great show. It's good to catch up with you. We'll have to do one maybe later this week or next week. And,
yeah, I love it. I love hearing your voice, Joe. You're the voice of stability in California.
I'll try to keep it all together here.
You are keeping it together. I could see you're in your office, and I didn't see anyone walking in the background. So it seems like you're alone there.
Well, it is a holiday for most people, but these are one of the days I get a lot of stuff done because no one's bugging you. So it's kind of a productive day for me. So
that's right. This really should have been labeled a Happy President's Day.
That's right.
Holiday. And President's Day is a time to appreciate that there is so much power in the presidency and really so much potential for dysfunction at the same time. So, President's Day needs to be worshiped because by and large, most presidents, most of the time, have been sane and sober, which of course are the two, key factors to health quotient. And I think that there's been lots of questions recently about whether health quotient really existed in the last presidency. That's for sure. I think there are some people that think he must be bouncing off of the walls, with McConnell saying that he could be criminally convicted now that he's no longer in office. I mean,
crazy.
Saying, what are you doing, Mitch? You used to be my buddy. What gives?
I want to talk to you next time a little bit about these SPACs and what kind of relationship that is having, or what kind of an effect that might be having on venture capital. Kind of interesting model now, right?
It's causing some disruption in what would certainly call the private equity funding stage.
Okay.
That some businesses otherwise go through, and it does create an alternative, albeit at a high price. I'll send you some information, and we can summarize it together in a way that says to folks, because there is another book I've been working on, and hopefully it'll lead to a series of podcasts that are more about exiting, sort of like growing and exiting from a business, because every business has a natural exit point for the founder. Even if the business is continuing, the founder leaves and cashes out. And it is a happy day when that happens, if it happens in a happy way. It's a sad day if it happens with a bankruptcy or with a close down of the business. I mean, obviously it's something to talk about, and it's something to counsel about, because you try to start the business with the end in mind. Because it's typically what leads to the best outcome.
Yeah. Well, we will cover that next time. It's good seeing you, Jack.
Well, it's good seeing you, Joe. I hope you come out to Florida at some point. I know travel's restricted, but when it gets too cold there and you want to hop on a plane, just look at MCO, United, SFO to MCO.
I'm targeting
and be on the flight by yourself.
I'd like to I would seriously like to take a trip out there in March, so I will keep you posted.
Well, and the other thing I wanted to do with you, and this is a footnote, we are meant to visit that manufactured home.
That's right.
And he's supposed to be up and running fully in March. So I'll be back in March, presumably for a trial if it really happens.
Okay.
And we can plan a trip and drive together to Reno and see what that facility looks like.
Yeah, that sounds good. All right. Take care of yourself.
Right.
We'll see you next time. All right.
Thank you very much. See you later.
Yeah. Joe Cucchiara with Real Estate Radio Live, joined by Jack Russo. We'll be back with you in the next couple of days. Thanks again for tuning in. For more information, you can go to RERL-1750-Why. Thanks again. Take care.
You've been listening to Real Estate Radio Live. For more information on today's program, visit RERadiolive.com. That's RERadiolive.com. Subscribe to our podcast. Discover more at reradiolive.com.